Well, everyone, we get to finally talk about the Samsung Galaxy S21 Ultra and see why this specific phone is still completely worth it in 2023. Now, this phone I think is tremendous still. It still has so much quality and capability. So if you want to pick up some phones I would recommend this year, including this one, and links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of this specific phone, the S21 Ultra, when it came out back in 2021, had a beautiful 6.8-inch dynamic AMOLED display. And at that time, in my opinion, it was probably one of the best panels ever made on any Samsung phone. It was beautiful. It still looks so sharp and great. And there's really not too much to complain about here. I think this is probably one of the better phone panels still out there, which is crazy because this phone has been out for almost 2 years now. So, of course, the S22 Ultra's panel looks a little bit better probably in some areas, but I like the S21 Ultra just because it just looks so beautiful when it came out and it still looks great. Curved display as well, fingerprint sensor in the display, hole punch camera as well. This phone pretty much has it all, and I definitely do think it's probably one of its best assets for sure. Now, on the bottom of this phone, we do have our USB Type-C port, which is awesome, and it does have Samsung DeX inside of it as well, which I think is great. Having Samsung DeX is awesome. Now, this phone, actually, this is probably the saddest thing about this phone. It actually doesn't have a SD card slot. So that was one of the biggest, I would say, disadvantages of owning one of these types of phones now. From the S21 onwards, we haven't gotten that SD card slot back. And like I said, I think that was one of the sadder aspects here. But beyond that, I think we've kind of gotten used to it. It's not a big deal, but it is what it is. No headphone jack either, which is expected. And on the back of this phone, we do have our frosted glass back, which again, I think is amazing. This was actually the first Samsung Galaxy S phone to actually have, well, the S21s were the first ones to have a, frosted back of any sorts. The S21s was plastic. The S21 Ultras was glass, and it looked really good. At that moment back in the day, I thought it looked great, and even now, it still looks so amazing. So I definitely do think Samsung did a really good job here, and although this phone isn't perfect, I think Samsung, overall, the build quality of this phone, the capability behind this phone, the camera setup on the back, everything about this phone is so great. You also have that wireless charging and reverse wireless charging on this phone as well, which I think that in and of itself is another really cool thing. Having wireless and reverse wireless charging is really cool. You can charge up other Galaxy, Samsung accessories, your watches, your Galaxy Buds. Really cool feature, and you do have that on this phone. So overall, what I'll definitely tell you is Samsung knocked it out of the park with the build quality of this phone, and even now, it still feels like one of the most expensive phones you can actually buy. So at the end of the day, the outside definitely gets a thumbs up for me. Now in the camera department, Samsung also just probably threw in some of the craziest amount of capability behind this camera as well. So for one, it has a quadruple camera setup. So we have a 108 megapixel wide angle lens, 10 megapixel periscope telephoto lens, a 10 megapixel telephoto lens, and then a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera. Now this camera at the end of the day, as I mentioned before, it is a crazy good camera. You could theoretically do pretty much anything you'd ever want to with a lens like this. Now, it's definitely not perfect like I mentioned, but I definitely do think from the back cameras on this thing, it is very solid. Now, Samsung also threw in a 40 megapixel wide angle lens on the front of this phone too, and that was another really cool thing. Again, having that much capability on a phone like this is crazy, and really, realistically speaking, if you get a phone like this, the camera quality is just still so good that I don't really see why you'd complain about it that much here. Now, the only thing I could even think about complaining about this phone is that sometimes when you do go about and you actually do pretty much use applications like Snapchat and TikTok and Instagram, those types of applications may not perform the best in some areas. Now, I definitely do think it's gotten better throughout time, but still we're kind of in this weird situation where, the quality of these cameras in those specific applications aren't that great. But like I mentioned, it does get better throughout time, and I think that's probably one of the bigger things to keep in mind here. So, in my opinion, again, not a big massive thing, but just one of those things to keep in mind. Now, I definitely do think in the other areas of this specific phone, I think, like I said, Samsung knocked it out of the park. The software and the longevity portion of this phone, I think definitely needs to get a little bit better though. It's still going to be supported with software. It's not really going anywhere anytime soon. So again, I think that's kind of a cool thing. There's really not too much to complain about there. But I do think when it comes down to it, Samsung kind of, needs to start approaching their software updates for their older phones a little bit better. I think their newer ones are doing great, like the S21 and S22. I feel like with the S10 and S20, those are probably could have even gotten One UI 7 or something like that. But with this phone, you're still going to be getting a phone that's supported for many, many years. And again, when you're getting a phone like this, there's really not too much to complain about in that standpoint. So this phone's still supported. Because the Galaxy S10 stopped at One UI 5, the S20s are probably going to stop at One UI 6. The S21s could very well stop at One UI 7 or One UI 8. So think about that for a second. We still have many, many years of this phone support, probably for the next several years. Who knows, right? Now, even if this thing only ends up lasting for like another 2 years, that's still a pretty long amount of time for this phone to have been supported that long. So it definitely gets a thumbs up for me. And from that perspective, I think that is a really big thing to keep in mind. So in terms of the software and longevity, that kind of covers it up there as well. Now on the performance side, this phone has that Qualcomm Snapdragon 888 chipset inside of it. And this phone had a couple of different models. So the base models had 12 gigabytes of RAM and the top tier models had 16 gigs of RAM. Now this is a really big thing to keep in mind because I think the S22 Ultra actually had less RAM than this thing, which is actually pretty insane. But with this phone, you are getting so much power and so much capability. To give you some perspective, the PC that I use on an everyday basis, the laptop I use here, has 16 gigabytes of RAM. That has the same amount of RAM as the top tier model of this phone. So you are theoretically getting so much power and so much capability behind this phone that it's not even funny. I don't even know why you'd need that much RAM in a phone, to be honest. But what I'll tell you is, for basic applications and things like that, you're going to be perfectly fine. We all know this. If you're getting this phone and all you do is like text and call people and barely use Instagram, this phone is overkill. You really don't need a phone of this caliber, to be completely honest. But if you're using a phone like this and you take it up a notch and you're doing, very intensive gaming and you're doing maybe things even beyond gaming like video editing on your phone, or you're doing some really, really crazy computational things on your device, this is going to be a phone that's going to last you a very long amount of time here. Like, this phone is not going anywhere anytime soon. It has so much power that I honestly do think, like I said, if you get a phone like this, there isn't really too much to complain about. The power of this phone speaks for itself, and you are going to be here for a long period of time with using this phone, in my opinion. So in terms of the power, that kind of covers it up there as well. Now in the, basically in the battery standpoint, 5,000 milliamp hour battery, very solid battery life as well on this type of device. You can use this thing all day. Now I will say it's a big display. It's a 120 Hz display as well. So there's definitely going to be some things to keep in mind. But I think beyond that, this is a very good, phone in the battery life standpoint as well. Again, it could be couldn't be better, but because this phone needs a lot of power to run, you will notice maybe sometimes like the battery life will go down if you're playing super intensive games. But regardless, it's pretty much expected on any device. So that pretty much covers it up here. And to be completely honest, I think the Samsung Galaxy S21 Ultra is still completely worth it, like how I mentioned earlier on in this video. It's a very good phone with a ton of power, and I don't really think you can go wrong with it. I do think though that if you wanted to, you could go up to the S20 or go down to the S20 Ultra and still have a very good phone too. Like, that phone is killer, but this phone is still very, very good. Like, it's so funny because there's not even things I can complain about this phone. Even the small little things like TikTok and Instagram, camera quality, or like even some other things, like it's just such a reach. This phone is still so good, and I would highly recommend picking it up for sure. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.